Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The object of this talk is to explain that the system which is currently dominant in the world, the economic, political and social system, which can be briefly referred to as capitalism, this system is facing a crisis of large proportions. What is the nature of this crisis and how it can be solved? These are the issues that I will try to explain and discuss in this talk. Many people are under the false impression that the crisis is over, that the global financial crisis has played out and things are back to normal. So first I would like to establish that this crisis is ongoing. There are some aspects of it have been suppressed, but a huge number of consequences are still with us and will remain with us for a long period of time. So, for example, unemployment has increased massively. The amount of income inequality currently we see in the world is at levels which have never been seen before, until perhaps the Roman times, where a small class of elite had all the privileges and the vast majority of the population were merely slaves. Such things are currently being seen in the world. We have the dollar crisis which is looming. Many economists have predicted that the dollar will collapse, mainly because we have trillions of dollars of liabilities, as the US has been printing money without any consequences and without having any assets which back it up. Currently, levels of homelessness and hunger in the USA are at record levels and have never been seen before since the World War. And this has led to the Occupy Wall Street movement, which has fizzled out, but it expresses a deep and genuine problem that is being faced by masses of people. The extreme and increasing inequality has been labeled the top 1% problem. Over the past 10 years, all of the economic growth and gains, about 85% has gone to the top 1%. So most of the so-called economic progress is only enriching the rich and often at the expense of the poor. We are facing ecological and environmental problems at a scale that has never been seen before. This is also due to the economic system. The way we measure GNP and wealth does not take into account, does not subtract the value of the natural resources destroyed. If you extract oil, which is completely irreplaceable, you make money from it, but the loss of the oil, which can never be replaced in a million years, is not counted as a cost. Similarly, if you cut down forests or destroy coral reefs, or species of animals are eliminated, wiped out from the world forever, this is a loss of biodiversity which can never be made up, but it does not count as a cost as long as you make money from the process. The money that you make is counted as increase in wealth. So there has been massive ecological and environmental damage, and the consequences are frightening. Similarly, there has been a crisis of knowledge. The global financial crisis was not predicted are not predictable by conventional economic theories, and similarly a large number of theories from what we call the social sciences are proving to be false and fallacious and unreliable and untrustworthy. All of this has to do also with capitalism, which is supported by such theories which say that greed is good and the markets become efficient if we allow ruthless, cutthroat competition. All of these are false theories, but these have promoted and created the current crisis. Perhaps most important and most fundamental is the corrosion of character which has taken place in market societies. The ideals of honesty, integrity, service to others, sacrifice, these have become synonyms for simplicity, idiocy, and foolishness, while those characteristics and properties which were considered bad have become promoted. For example, the greed is good motto of Wall Street suggests that something which has been universally regarded as a bad thing is now to be considered a good thing, and it is promoted by economists who say that if everyone acts greedily and selfishly, this will promote social interest in the best possible way. This is a complete misunderstanding and misinterpretation, but stating and teaching ideas like this leads to corrosion of character. So there are many dimensions on which the system that we are living in is facing a very deep and serious crisis, and our goal is to understand how this came to be and what can be done about it. The root causes of this crisis that we are facing are very deep. The global financial crisis is only one small manifestation of the problem. There are many other crises which are not so clearly visible, but they are going on in any way, and it's just that they are not making headlines, so we are not so aware of them. But let's focus on the global financial crisis. So what caused this crisis? Well, everybody knows that there was a massive failure of mortgage loans. Basically, mortgages were issued by banks to people who could not pay, and when a large number of these mortgages started to collapse, then the bottom fell out of these markets, and this caused serious disturbance in the financial markets. But that is just what you might call the proximate cause or the immediate cause. Why did this happen? Why did such a large number of bad mortgage loans get made? Well, it was because there was a profit in it. And how did this profit opportunity come to be? Basically, it was because banks were greedy. Many people knew that these mortgages would blow up, but they did not care. They, as long as they could secure their own profit, they did not care that the society and the person who was taking the loan and many others would get hurt as a consequence. So it's almost clear that greed, or looking out for your own benefits and not caring about consequences to others, was an important cause of this. But why is it that the bankers were so greedy? Is it the case that they have always been so greedy? That's also not true. The attitude towards greed and the social acceptability of the profit motive, this has changed over time. And in fact, in an experiment that has spanned 2 centuries, greed and selfishness have gradually become more and more acceptable, and what we are seeing is the long-range consequences of this experiment. So one can say that the modernity or the secular idea was tried as an experiment in the West. This is sometimes called the Enlightenment Project. The idea of the Enlightenment Project was that man can use his reason and his observations and not rely on any kind of religious knowledge or revelation. Our own logic is enough for our guidance, and this was an experiment which has taken centuries to unfold, and now we are seeing the consequences. But now there is no possibility of a solution to this problem in the West, because it is impossible for them to go back to their religion and revelation, because that religion and revelation is fundamentally flawed. But there is no option other than to use revelation in order to get guidance. There is no guidance available from logic alone. So in fact, Islam currently offers us the solutions and the way out of this crisis, and Islam is in a unique position to do so, because there is no one else who has the moral vision that is required to change the current state of affairs. But in order to fulfill the promise, we will have to have leadership and vision and courage. Islam has the potential to lead the world now, as it did 14 centuries ago, when it came to the most backwards people on the planet and transformed them into world leaders and created a civilization which lasted for 1,000 years in terms of its global importance. Today the situation is very similar. The darkness surrounds us all around, and the light of Islam has the same potential to transform the world, but it is a challenge for the Muslims to understand it, adopt it in our lives, and offer it as a solution to the whole world. The great transformation that took place in Europe, as a traditional society was replaced by a market society, and there was a shift from religious thinking to secular thinking, and from pre-modern ideas to modern ideas. These transformations are very complex, and they have been described in many books, and I cannot summarize all of this information. I will focus on just one aspect which might be fundamental. It is an oversimplification, but for the purposes of our talk it will be enough to focus on one aspect of the change which occurred in Europe. In 16th, 17th century Europe, the idea from the Bible that the love of money is the root of all evil was widely accepted. Most people believed it and agreed with it, although of course there was always a minority, a small minority of avant-garde people who were who rejected it and who considered this as hypocrisy and pious pronouncements which nobody believed. But the fact is that most of the society agreed with this idea that greed is bad and love of money is not a good thing. And for example, the novel of Charles Dickens shows that Scrooge, who is a miser, is in for a bad end until he changes his own habits. So this and becomes generous and tries to give something to the poor, and that brings him happiness and improves his life. So this was the popular sentiment. Everybody believed that miserliness, stinginess, greed, accumulation of wealth is bad, and the opposite characteristics, generosity, helping others, serving, is good. Now in the 20th century, George Bernard Shaw says that lack of money is the root of all evil, and this is also equally widely accepted in the present times. It is thought that if we only had enough money, we could solve all the problems of the world, and acquiring money, trying to make money for yourself, accumulating it, hoarding it, and keeping it for one's use, these are no longer considered bad. In fact, the Disney cartoon, which has Scrooge McDuck, Scrooge is the same Scrooge as the Dickens character. Now the fact that he is greedy and he has accumulated money is no longer considered a vice. This is a lovable characteristic. It shows that he is smart and sharp, and so this is also the transformation of the Scrooge of Dickens to the Scrooge of Disney is an indication of how much the society has changed. So one of the important issues to understand in terms of tracing the story of how capitalism, how the crisis in capitalism has occurred, is to understand how this change occurred in European society, where something which was very widely believed changed into its exact opposite. How did this transformation take place, that the exact opposite of a widely believed maxim again became widely believed and popular? So tracing this change and some aspects of this is going to be one part of our talk. As I've said before, this changes that occurred, the great transformation, is very complex and multidimensional. We are only going to trace some key steps in the history of how this change happened. One of the main reasons for this is that these steps are not at all well known. In fact, the story that is told about how this change happened is very different from the story the real story, which I will now describe briefly. So the real history of how greed changed from a bad quality into a good quality starts with the corruption in Catholic Church in the 16th century, where there was a sequence of popes who did unimaginably bad things. They had luxurious lifestyles. They did many things which were just a manifestation of the power that they had, and they did not care. They flaunted their vices in the face of the people. They sold pardons for sin to raise money for their luxuries, and ultimately this led to a revolt. Martin Luther said that the church has become corrupt, and the only thing that can guide us is the book and our faith. So there were actually three prongs in the religion. One of them was the tradition embodied in the Catholic Church, and then the other was the Bible, which is the text of the religion, and then there was the faith, which is the spirituality. So of these three, the tradition embodied in the Catholic Church was thrown out by Martin Luther, which led to the Reformation and the emerging of Protestants. And then there were some really very bloody wars between different factions, and whenever one faction would gain power, it would really use unimaginable cruelty to other factions, suppress them, and do everything. With this interminable fighting among religions, people became very disenchanted with religion, secular thought emerged as the idea that society should not be governed by religion, because religion always causes conflict. So religion should be a private matter. Every person should choose his own religion. But when it comes to the public sphere, how people behave towards each other and how the governments are formed, this should be based on secular ideas which are not based on religion. So this was one of the reasons for the emergence of secular thought in Europe. Now let us think about how a secular society will operate. In a secular society, the assumption is that different groups have their own religions and there is no agreement on a common religious goal. So the idea that the society is all working together for some common goal is no longer possible. Every individual is supposed to have a different religion and different goals. Now how can we all work together? It is necessary for a society to have some common principles and some agreements, because we need to make common laws and we need to agree on many things in order for the society to operate. So what could a secular society agree on? Well, one of the agreements was that everyone should have freedom to pursue their own religion. This is very different from standard concepts. People are not supposed to be free. They're supposed to be bound by their religion. They're supposed to be bound by their society. Many different kinds of constraints exist on human freedom. But in a secular society, it was essential to remove some of these constraints, and in the long run we see the consequences that even if people are engaged in worship of Satan, this is also to be allowed in a secular society. Although this thing didn't happen immediately, it took a long time for evolution. Slowly more and more freedom was allowed. Similarly, wealth is an important aspect of freedom, in the sense that if one group has wealth, then it can do whatever they want to, and if they don't have the means, then the freedom is just an idea. They cannot actually take any projects or carry out anything, because they don't have the material means to carry out this project. So as a group in the secular society, it became permissible for each group to pursue wealth so that they could realize or actualize their freedom. So one essential aspect of living in a secular society was that everyone should be free to follow their own religion, and everyone should be free to accumulate wealth in order to achieve whatever personal goals they had, because there was no common goals for the society as a whole. The European transition from a religious society to a secular society was also paralleled by another transition, which was from a traditional society to a market society. These two processes were in parallel to each other and also supported each other. The transition to a market society has been explained in detail by Karl Polanyi in a classic called The Great Transformation. The traditional society has self-sufficiency, and it has community, and it has society. The economic needs of all members are met by the society as a whole, not via the impersonal market mechanism. In a market society, all economic affairs are regulated or conducted through the marketplace. There is no self-sufficiency, because you buy the things that you don't need and you sell the things that you have surplus of. So it's not that you have all of the things that you need, which is what traditional societies do. One of the features of a market society is that they produce more than they need. This is opposed to the traditional society, which is basically self-sufficient. There is no need to produce excess because there is no use for it. There is not much function for trading. If you have everything you need, you don't trade. Market societies generate surplus, and then the surplus is sold, and comparative advantage theory just says that you produce something you specialize in and others produce other things, and you buy the things that you need instead of producing all the things that you need. So in the market society, the markets are central. They all economic needs are met through the market, but markets are not very natural. Human beings don't respond strongly to the money motivation. Human beings are motivated by many things. They are motivated by curiosity, by challenges, by honor, by many kinds of traditional emotions, but not by profit. Profit is a relatively weak motivation. So if we want to make markets central, then it's important to strengthen the motivation of greed. If employees of my store are not very much interested in money, then one day they'll show up for work and the other day they won't, because they don't care that much about earning. And in that case, the market society will break down. So it's important that everybody should be strongly motivated by money, and this requires strengthening the motivation of greed. So there are many other factors which differentiate a market society from a traditional society, but from the point of view of the theme that we are pursuing, one of the effects of transition to a market society is that the greed motivation is made more central and more important, and therefore also less odious and less socially unacceptable. The emergence of modern Europe was a complex and multidimensional process which has been discussed in thousands of books and cannot possibly be summarized here. One of the key issues, we've already discussed the transition from religious thought to secular thought, and from traditional society, which is basically self-sufficient, to a market society in which trading plays a major role in fulfilling the economic necessities. A third major concept which is helpful in understanding the change that took place, and one which relates to the theme that we are pursuing in this talk, is the idea of Societas versus Polis, which has been discussed by Manikas in his book on the history of philosophy. So basically, the original conception of society was that it was an organic whole. It was like a body in which all parts worked together for a common purpose, and this was a common metaphor used for government and societies in the pre-modern era. However, in the transition to secular society, the idea that everybody was working together for a common goal was lost because there was no common religion. So the whole concept of how a society should work was had to be rethought from scratch. If there is no agreement on goals and values and purposes, then it's not that the society, the members are working together for a common purpose. Now the idea is that how can we keep a social structure so that conflicts don't arise, and how people can live together at peace while everybody pursues his own goal separately. Again, this was a development which was favorable to the promotion of greed as being a virtue. In traditional societies, greed is harmful, and all individuals are trained to put the interests of the society above their own personal individual interests. However, as we have seen in Europe, many changes were taking place in which this particular philosophy was no longer very useful. For one thing, there was no group as a whole, and so it was useful to promote the idea of greed, which has traditionally been condemned as a harmful and harmful to the interests of society. So the needs of the evolving society led to a search for new ideas which would support greed, which would support selfishness as being good things or necessary things. So many such arguments were found. Among the first such arguments was the argument of passions versus interests. This means that religion is a very deep emotion, a very deep belief, and for the sake of religious ideals, people are willing to die and kill. And it had been the European experience that there had been a huge number of extremely bloody wars over religion, and people with religious faith had really done an enormous amount of damage, inflicted a large amount of pain on others. So the first argument that was made in favor of promoting greed was that the traders' desire to make a little bit of money was just interest. It was not a passion, and they would not kill for it, and they would not die for it. So even if it was considered to be cheap and vulgar and a bad thing, still some people argued that it is better to have people motivated by this greed than to have people motivated by religion, because the religious motivation could lead to bloodshed and wars, whereas the interest of the traders in making a profit would not lead to wars and would not lead to bloodshed. It would just lead to someone to cheat the other, perhaps out of a little bit of money. So the idea was that the temptation of greed, of making profits, might be useful as a counterfoil to religion. Religion would make people fight each other, but the tendency to trade for profits might make people avoid wars and might make it possible for nations to coexist and trade with each other. So this was one of the ideas that was promoted to one of the ideas that was proposed to suggest that maybe greed is better than what it is thought to be in religious arguments. The second argument in favor of greed was the famous invisible hand of Adam Smith. Adam Smith argued that people, traders, merchants would act selfishly, and without actually intending to do so, they would bring about social benefits. He gave the example of a merchant who's noticed that there is no fish in one place, and he provides fish to that place in order to make a profit, but in doing so he also provides a social service. Now the question I want to think about here is not whether or not the argument is valid, but rather why was there a need to make such an argument? Why should one want to argue that selfish behavior leads to social benefits when most often it does not? Well, at that time there was, in the secular society, a major argument was taking place. On the one side there was Hobbes, and he argued that people don't have very good self-control, and people are like beasts and they will tear each other apart unless you have a very strong and powerful state which will regulate all behavior. So on the other hand, there was the other side which said that if you just allow people to be free, then good things will happen. So the Hobbesian argument that a strong government is needed was not appealing to the powerful and the rich, because a strong government would lead to a level playing field where the poor and the oppressed and the exploited would have some rights which they could obtain by appealing to the government. For the rich and the powerful, the laissez-faire, let everybody do whatever they want, is much more appealing, because in practice it gives a lot more benefit to the powerful, and the freedom of the poor to do what they like doesn't really translate to much. It doesn't really mean very much, because they don't have the options in front of them. So the idea that greed is destructive to society and therefore must be regulated by the government is harmful to the interests of the powerful, and therefore an argument which favors the rich and powerful is that everybody should be allowed to do and pursue their personal interests, and this will automatically benefit society. Because this argument is favorable to the rich, it was duly put forth, and that's the reason for the quote which we saw earlier by Galbraith, that the moral philosopher wants to invent arguments for selfishness, because such arguments are useful to the powerful segments of society. Another argument for greed comes from the Calvinist sect of the Protestants. According to Max Weber, this was one of the crucial elements in the rise of capitalism in the West. According to the Calvinists, the wealth a man had was a sign of the favor of God. So people would strive to acquire wealth not because money is useful to us for the satisfaction of needs, but just for itself. So in combination with the Calvinist ethic of working hard as a duty, not really for the enjoyment of life at all, but also to collect money. This has been controversial. Max Weber's thesis has been controversial, but it is an argument, and he has documented it quite solidly, that, and he and others, that capitalism, the spirit of capitalism, is the pursuit of money for its own sake. So one of the elements which arose in making greed good was the idea that one could pursue wealth, that wealth was a sign of favor of God. This was quite in contradiction to earlier Christian theories in Catholic Church. In the early 20th century, Keynes made explicit another argument which has been in the background for a long time, and this was the idea that people are immoral because they don't have money. Basically, if people had enough money, then everybody would be generous, kind, honest. They would have no need, because they would have no need to acquire more money. They would be very pleasant people. So basically immorality occurs because people don't have enough money. So how can we increase the money in the society? Well, Keynes proposed a paradoxical thing. He said that actually the love of money, greed, etc. is disgusting. It's a very bad thing. However, even though it is disgusting, we should encourage it. We should allow people to be greedy. We should pretend that greed is good, because if people are greedy, then they will accumulate money. Once enough money is accumulated, then things will change. Then there will be enough money for everybody. So in the transition, in order to acquire enough money, we must propagate the virtue of greed. So this is a very interesting and sophisticated idea, that initially we make greed popular and people are greedy, and then they accumulate wealth, and once enough wealth accumulates, then this greed will somehow magically disappear and people will become kind and noble and generous. This idea is actually quite widespread and currently dominates thought of many people, even though the contrary has been observed. So we have been tracing how greed gradually became a good thing instead of a bad thing. In the initial steps, it was widely recognized that greed was a bad thing, but it was considered to be preferable to other alternatives which were even worse. In the final stages, as represented by Friedman and Hayek, all of this hesitation was lost and greed was declared to be by itself a desirable thing. So, for example, Hayek considers that individual freedom, so people being able to do whatever they want. If they want to be greedy, they can be greedy. If they want to be generous, they can be generous. It doesn't matter. The only thing is that freedom is the highest goal. Everyone should be free to do whatever they want to do, and if that's greed, then that's fine as well. Similarly, and there are many variants of this philosophy which are very popular. Ayn Rand is very famous for this propagating exactly this, that selfishness is a virtue. And similarly, Friedman, who has been the most influential among economists. Now I'm going to recapitulate the argument which has gotten spread out, and I'm going to summarize and explain what the point that I have been trying to make up till now as a basis for going on to the next part of this talk. So, in traditional societies, greed has been considered very harmful and dangerous for obvious reasons. If a person prefers his self-interest to the social interest, then society cannot survive. And so for this reason, traditional societies have taken a lot of measures to prevent greed from being spread. Children are trained to be kind and generous and cooperate and play with others and share their toys, and adults who are greedy are reprimanded and held in low esteem. And there are many social mechanisms to make sure that people act more or less for the benefit of society and sacrifice self-interest in favor of society when necessary. However, in Europe, an experiment was tried in which this traditional idea about greed was overturned. The idea was that greed is a very powerful force. Let us allow it to operate. It will bring many benefits. Everybody understood that this was a dangerous thing, but they thought that it could be controlled. They said, okay, let the traders be driven by greed. They thought that if this is allowed, this will create the accumulation of wealth, and this will lead to blessings, and basically it will turn this earth into a paradise where everyone can have whatever he wants, and there will be luxury for all, and when everybody has a lot of money, they will have excellent morals as well, because there will be no need to lie or cheat or steal, because you already have everything that you need. So there was this experiment, that there was this hope that if we allow greed to operate, which traditional societies have not done, and that's why they have been poor, if we allow greed to operate, then we will become rich, and this will change the game, as it were. And So this was the experiment that was tried in Europe over the past 2 centuries. However, things did not work out as planned, as expected. The consequences of this experiment have been extremely unfavorable and perhaps surprising and unexpected to at least those who started this experiment. The idea was that the greed would be kept confined to a limited domain of trade. It would not be the families would not be operated by greed, and politics and justice, etc. These would not. Everybody understood that you cannot allow greed to operate in those spheres. So the hope was that greed would be confined to commercial arena, the trading, and there the wealth would accumulate, while all other institutions would be conducted on standard social principles. However, what happened was that the gin came out of the bottle, and once it came out of the bottle, it could not be controlled. The greed did not remain confined to trade. It penetrated all social institutions, families, courts, governments, and with this penetration came great social disaster, environmental disaster, corruption in governments, corruption in trade, corruption everywhere. So the consequences of this experiment have been spectacularly unsuccessful. Nearly all of the arguments made by people who suggested that we should give greed a chance have turned out to be wrong. One of the first arguments made was that the traders are not as bad as fanatics, but empirically it has proven to be the case that traders are much worse than fanatics in terms of the lives destroyed. The glaring example in front of us is the Iraq War, where for the sake of controlling oil resources, the whole country was destroyed. Basically 1 million were killed and 40 million lives were destroyed, just for the sake of making profits from oil. Similarly, the current situation where the poorest countries of the world pay billions of dollars in interest to the rich, and this leads to some 11 million deaths of children every year. So it's the consequences of the trading system, the financial system. The search for profits on the dollar leads to deaths of 11 million children. So it's not it's far bigger than all of the incidents, all of the terrorist incidents. These deaths are in the thousands, but the deaths due to trade are in the millions. Similarly, Oxfam reports that unfair trade affects adversely the lives of 2.5 billion poor farmers. About $1 billion of aid every day is given to farmers in the rich countries who produce surplus and export to the poorer countries, where the poor farmers cannot compete with them and are therefore led to very miserable lives. All of these large statistics are not so don't move the heart as much as the idea that the powdered milk companies, the baby milk, how callously they trade lives of babies for profits is just amazing to anybody who is a human being and has a heart. These companies, knowing that the powdered milk is not as good as breast milk, they go out and run campaigns in areas just to increase their profits. In Pakistan, for example, the pregnant, the newborn child is given 2 weeks or 3 weeks supply of milk just for free at delivery time. This is just enough to
make sure that the female stops lactating, and so the baby becomes dependent on powdered milk. And the conditions in Pakistan are such that the hygiene level is poor, water is not boiled, people don't have understanding of the sterility, and people reuse milk because they are poor and milk is expensive, and reuse means that there is a huge probability of germs and parasites coming into the milk after a few hours. So basically one can say that thousands of lives of children are destroyed deliberately by these powdered milk companies for the sake of making a profit. So basically the idea that traders will not kill to make a small amount of money, whereas fanatics will kill for their beliefs, this has turned out to be wrong. The idea that if we allow greed to operate, wealth will accumulate and will benefit everybody, this has also turned out to be wrong. Wealth has indeed accumulated, but only in the hands of a very small number of people. This is now becoming more and more obvious. Stiglitz mentions the top 1% as being the beneficiaries, and indeed the data in USA show that of all of the growth which took place over the past 10 years, 85% was captured by the top 1%. 99% of the people did not see almost any benefit from all the growth that has taken place, and this has turned out to be a general pattern, increasing inequality, although the wealth accumulates, and actually you can think that this is a natural consequences. If we allow greed to operate, then those who are powerful, they will be able to accumulate much more than those who are powerless, and once they have the power, they will also be able to unfairly take away things which belong to others by making use of their power, and they will be motivated by greed to do so. So the rising inequality is a consequence of allowing greed to operate and making it an acceptable and permissible social to make it socially acceptable to be greedy. So this is just one graph among many that have been devised, which show how unfair the accumulation has been. Wealth has accumulated. If you look at the pay of the executives, it has gone up by 300%, but the laborers have actually lost ground, and their pay has not increased at all. In fact, in real terms, they have either been at a standstill or have been slightly declining. So the masses of the people, more than 99% of the people, have not seen many gains from this growth that took place, which was driven by greed. Only the very small percentage have benefited from it. So again, the idea of allowing greed to operate was that when wealth will accumulate, it will benefit all the people, but this has not happened. The hope was that accumulating wealth would lead to prosperity, but because of the way that wealth has accumulated, concentrated in the hands of very few, it has not in fact led to prosperity. In fact, quite the opposite. Today, hunger, homelessness, unemployment in the USA are at record levels, even though there has been a lot of growth. And so the hope that allowing greed to operate would lead to prosperity have also not been fulfilled. There has been, this is true in USA and also all over the world, prosperity has not resulted from the pursuit of wealth, from the unconstrained pursuit of wealth, and people all over are beginning to realize that we should have growth, but we should have growth with equity and many other terms, sustainable development. These have been invented to show that just the pure pursuit of wealth without any constraints causes a lot of damage to people, to environment, to societies, to every dimension. So unconstrained greed is actually very harmful, and we are beginning to recognize this empirically, and people are trying to take steps to stop some of the harm that is occurring, but they are not really looking at the root cause of the problem. The hope was that pursuit of wealth would lead to happiness, increased human welfare. If everybody had more money, there would be more welfare. This has not happened. Society has broken down because of greed. Divorce rates are very high. Basically, the fundamental unit of society is the family. People learn who they are, their fundamental place which they belong, and where they learn their basic moral values, and everything is the family. If the family unit is the family unit is the one which produces the human beings, the children who will shape and create society in the future. When the family breaks down, then the whole society is at risk, and this is indeed what has happened. The majority of the children who are born today in UK and US are born outside of marriage, which means that they cannot rely on a stable family environment. The effects of the lack of stable family environment are now being widely documented in terms of people who grow up in broken families. They are more subject to drug abuse, to alcohol, to suicide, depression, you name it, and the problems that all of the problems, crime, etc., are much higher in children growing up from broken families than they are in children in stable families, and stable families have now become a minority in the West. Also, this leads to loneliness. Obviously, if we pursue individuality and greed, nobody else likes to be with somebody who is purely selfish and greedy, and so there will be loneliness, self-sacrifice, service to others, commitment, sacrificing personal interest over others. This is what leads to love and bonding and social commitments. And when these things are thrown out of the window, as they have been in the West, in the pursuit of greed, this leads to loneliness. At a more global level, there are the studies of Easterlin which show that a huge amount of economic growth has taken place without having any impact on the happiness or welfare or satisfaction of the people. So in some sense, this pursuit of wealth has been an illusion. Even when it has accumulated, it has not brought happiness to the people. The hope was that increased wealth would lead to character development. If people had a lot of money, then they would be generous and kind and noble. All of the character problems are caused by lack of wealth. In fact, what has happened as a result of allowing greed to operate is that there has been an extreme corrosion of character, a decline in morality that has taken place in the West that has been documented by many sources. Everything is for sale in a market economy. The statistics on sexual slavery in the USA and the world over are shocking, horrifying. Very few people know the extent of the numbers involved, including in the USA itself. And of course, wombs are for sale. People can hire, women can hire out their wombs as a place for surrogate babies. Sperms are for sale. Ivy League graduates can sell them, and so on. Kidneys are for sale. Corporations can buy the right to pollute, the right to dump garbage in various places, and they can buy the name to buildings, etc. So all of this is detrimental to character. The idea that all is fair in love and war has become widely accepted, and so this has led to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the possibility of burning 6 million people, including innocents, children, women. This is a modern invention
which was never done by religious fanatics in the past. Firebombing of Dresden, the embargoes that are done for political reasons that end up killing by starvation huge numbers of people. The destruction of the family has led to a very a destruction of character. Children have no place to learn about morality because the stable family environment is lacking, which provides moral education. And this is Josephson Institute surveys of morality among high school children show shocking results. These teenagers are cheating, lying, stealing from nearby relatives in large numbers, and what's worse is that they don't consider this behavior immoral. They think that they are normal people and that the behavior that they do is not immoral behavior. So again, the hope that allowing greed to operate in wealth would lead to accumulation of wealth, and that would solve all problems, including moral problems, this has turned out to be false. This talk is meant for the poor countries of the world, the metaphorical South, and one common objection to this is, why do we want to discuss what's happening in the West, the breakdown of families and this and that and the other? We have our own problems which are quite different from those being faced in the West, and we should worry about our own problems, let them figure out their issues. So the reason to talk about the problems of the West is that we are on a train which is headed in the same direction. Our leaders and a large proportion of the public is very much interested in following exactly the same trajectory which the West has taken. We want to adopt whatever models they are working with, and we think of progress as moving from our own current position to whatever social and institutional structures the West has. If we do follow this trajectory, then we will have the same results that have occurred in the West. Now, given all of the problems that I have discussed, why are people, both leaders and public, so interested in following the West? This is because there is a propaganda machine which minimizes all of the problems and makes everything appear very beautiful. It is like the ads which for cigarettes which glorify a project and make a product and make it appear attractive, even though the reality of the project is very hideous. The reality of the product, that cigarettes, is very hideous. It leads to cancer, but the ads make it appear attractive. In exactly the same way, the Western lifestyle, the Western wealth, Western culture, everything is made to appear very attractive by the television. As you can see in today's movies, people who are murderers, people who are murderers for hire, prostitutes, criminals, all of them are made to appear as lovable human beings, torturers and war heroes who kill. All of these people are made to appear as charming and attractive and desirable lifestyles, even though the reality is extremely different. So in order for us in the East to change our course, to change the trajectory, it's very important to learn the reality of the West, the real outcomes which have actually occurred, instead of the glorified image that is being projected by Hollywood as if everything is glorious and beautiful in the West. The common and widespread idea that we must follow the West in order to achieve success is based on a number of illusions. One of the first and most important illusions is that money will buy us happiness. So we must pursue money,
at any cost, and the West has shown us how. So regardless of what other problems they have, we don't need to worry about it. Once we get the money, we will be happy. The reality is the Easterlin paradox, that although for an individual, if he gets more money, he becomes happier, in the short run, this is not true for the society as a whole, and it's not true in the long run. That's the basic Easterlin paradox, which has been documented and studied in repeated studies. Nations have grown a huge amount, doubled or tripled, or even gone to income 10 times without actually increasing individual happiness. This is because people look at people compare themselves with others around them, and if everybody has more money, then the level of comparison becomes higher and people are not as happy. People are interested in their relative standing compared to the others, and the data shows that very large amounts of economic growth did not lead to an increased happiness in the society. Also, comparing across societies, very rich societies and very poor societies can have equivalent levels of happiness. So there is no correlation between growth and money and happiness in the long run, although there is in the short run. For a little while, money can make you happy, but in the long run, this correlation disappears. So the illusion that money buys happiness is one of the pillars which leads us to try to imitate the West, because certainly they have been very successful at this enterprise of accumulating money. As opposed to the illusion that money buys happiness, the reality is that richness is the contentment of the heart. Today the television and other media is inviting us to pursue luxury and luxurious lifestyles which are not really possible for all people on the planet. So in fact, even the idea is something that is an illusion, that can never be achieved by all people. The reality is that simple lifestyles lead to contentment, and they are possible for everyone. And as Gandhi said, there is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So greed is actually self-destructive. It leads to competition, rivalry, loneliness, enmity, and actually human beings enjoy society far more than they enjoy goods. So if we could have friends and happiness and sincerity and love, we could do with much less in the way of material goods. The idea that material goods is what leads to happiness is a complete illusion, as many people have documented. There is a book called Loss of Happiness in Market Economies. Basically, market economies create the idea that it is consumption which leads to happiness, whereas in fact it is society and friends and our commitment to our social obligations. These are the things which are the source of long-term happiness, and not consuming more and more goods. And it has been documented by many authors that pursuit of goods and the rise of the market economy has destroyed the best things and the most important sources of human happiness. At the very least, if nothing else is true, the pursuit of wealth should have led to an accumulation of wealth, but even that turns out to be illusion. It is not true that people pursuing wealth on their own have increased the wealth that is available to the society as a whole, because a lot of its wealth has been created by destruction and theft, which does not create wealth for the world as a whole. Actually, it destroys natural wealth, social wealth, in order to gain individual wealth. So it seems as if the world is richer, the GNP per capita is increasing, science and technology is advancing. We have lots of patents, inventions and gadgets. We have computers and rockets, and we have a tremendous amount of knowledge that's available in the internet. So it appears as if the world is a richer place because we have allowed this greed to operate. But this is also turns out to be just an illusion. The reality is that this pursuit of wealth has made the world a poorer place by many counts. It's basically a biased measure that leads to the illusion that the world is richer. We have seen entire countries destroyed and entire societies completely wiped out because some multinational or some nation is pursuing profits, or so things that are destroyed can never be recreated. Similarly, many kinds of flora and fauna, animals and plants have been wiped out and they can never be recreated. It was a million-year process to generate a new species, and now it's gone forever and will never come back. And similarly, huge amount of environmental catastrophe is taking place. When we count oil wealth, we can see that there is money being generated by sale of oil, but we don't calculate the fact that we are depleting resources and causing pollution, and this cost is something which is not calculated in the GNP calculations. And again, there has been a knowledge explosion, but at the same time there has been a loss of wisdom. A lot of very simple things, for example the idea that greed is good, which have a lot of deep wisdom which has been inherited, has been discounted. For example, for most of 20th century and even now, it was widely believed that morality is just noise. There's no scientific basis for morality, and therefore it just doesn't exist. There is no such thing. It is the loss of wisdom like this which has led to the current situation where people know a lot but don't have any wisdom. One of the Oppenheimer, who was the inventor of the atom bomb, he was asked to testify in a secret meeting before the Congress. The notes are available on the internet. And the people asked him what would the effects of the atom bomb be. So he described all of the mushroom cloud and the colors and basically the spectacular fire show that would result from the dropping of the atom bomb. It was only after doing all of this that he, when asked about the human consequence, he mentioned that the thousands of everyone within a certain radius, 5-mile radius would be completely destroyed, and the radiation and the heat would kill everybody. So this was only a secondary and peripheral effect. The main effect was the fireworks, the brilliant and beautiful fireworks. So this kind of moral blindness which has resulted, while at the same time a lot of technical knowledge has accumulated, this is the reality, that the world is a lot poorer and not richer as a result of the pursuit of greed. There is a widespread illusion that as a result of all this growth, humans are now better off. We have vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, washing machines, rockets, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, internet, computers, Facebook. There have been medical advances, there have been increases in life expectancies. There are lots of things which have happened which never before existed. So obviously human beings are better off. In fact, there is a lot of evidence which says that the opposite has happened. I have already mentioned the moral decline, the broken families, and we can see that there is higher crime, alcoholism, depression, suicide. There is no provision of moral training, and actually integrity, honesty, sincerity, compassion, these are the characteristics that lead to happy lives. So without these, without the moral compass, human beings lead very miserable lives, and happiness depends on virtue. But when virtue is not taught, people do not automatically learn it, and as a result we see extreme misery even when people have riches. And the fact is that because of the highly uneven income distribution, a lot of people living in very rich societies are in fact poor. So human happiness has not actually been achieved. Human beings are not better off as a result of this pursuit of wealth and all of the growth that has taken place. So this is again not a path for us to follow in the. So I've made this argument at length with perhaps greater detail and more repetition than necessary. This is because the opposite of what I am saying is very widespread and very widely believed, and so to counter this requires some time and effort, and indeed it's unlikely that people will be immediately convinced. You will have to think through the points that I have pointed out on your own and absorb them gradually, because they're quite the opposite of what is being widely propagated. But let me just conclude by saying what is the result of this analysis. First of all, as far as I can see, the West is lost. They don't have the resources to recover from this position. They have made individualism and selfishness and greed as the central pillars of their society, and they have realized that this leads to very bad outcomes socially. But now how to go back, this is not at all easy, because cooperation and commitment and social responsibility, these are very hard to, this is easy to break down, but once broken down it's very hard to put back together. Humpty Dumpty tale is very valid here. So one needs certain kinds of social and cultural and moral resources in order to build back, and they don't have it. At the moment in the East we have culture, we have society, we have religion, we have the forces which were all present in the West but they lost. However, we are actually headed very rapidly in exactly the same direction as the West. Our cultural institutions, our families, our respect for community, for elders, for society, our traditions of sacrifice and virtue, these are all under attack by media, by Hollywood movies which promote immorality, and our youngsters are very eagerly listening to this message and they are very attracted to it. So we are under severe threat that we will also head in exactly the same direction. The Hollywood movies present a very charming picture of what is actually a very cruel and heartless society and lonely society, but it is made to appear so attractive that our youth eagerly pursue those lines. So we are under threat of following suit and going and achieving exactly the same bad outcomes that have already occurred in the West. So what is to be done? What is the solution to this problem? The first part is to get beyond the illusion, to get beyond the Hollywood movies, to understand the reality, and that's what most of this talk has been about. But once we understand that all is not well, and that is what is on the cover is not the same as what is inside, the attractive packaging of the movies is not at all in correspondence with the reality of life in the West, then we have to understand how can we prevent our own societies from following the same trajectory. And so basically we have to make use of the resources that we have in form of existing culture, existing society, existing family structure, existing social norms, and we have to promote generosity, we have to promote concern for others, compassion, we have to promote trust. These are the qualities which are exactly the opposite of the ones that are being promoted in the West, with greed and selfishness and competition. So as opposed to the market society, which is based on greed and competition, we should promote generosity and cooperation. In the USA, or actually everywhere in the world, when people are studying for their MBA, they are told that the goal of business is to make profits, and so we provide service so that we can make profits. We have to reverse that idea in our societies. We have to say that our goal is to serve others, and we make profits so that we can continue to provide the service. If after all, if we started distributing goods for free, we wouldn't be able to do it for very long. This idea of service was once very widespread. Everybody who intended to be a doctor in our societies in some 50 years ago, let's say, did so because they had they were idealistic. They wanted to serve mankind, not because they wanted to make a profit out of the misery of others. This last was considered a bad sentiment. Even when I was entering my PhD in economics, most of our classmates said that their motivation in studying economics was to be able to help people to solve their economic problems. But in the course of our training, we were told that laissez-faire is the best. Just let everybody do whatever they want, and automatically the best outcomes will result. So this is something which we must avoid, this kind of training and education, and we must change the style of education so as to teach our children to provide that the goals are not to make profits but to serve others, and that these ideals, serving others, compassion, cooperation, love, trust, sacrifice, these are the things that bring happiness, not the greedy pursuit of profits for one's own selfish benefit. So the reality is that we are engaged in a desperate battle for survival. The ways of life that we have are under threat, and actually the forces that are arrayed against us are very strong and cannot be underestimated, and a lot of damage has already been done. This talk has already been long, and it's not really the time to discuss solutions. First step in working for solutions is to create awareness of the problem, and mainly this is what this talk has been about, to create an awareness of the problem. But let me just mention some of the most important fronts that we must fight on if we are to survive. I guess the most important front is the family. The family has been completely destroyed in the West, and is under threat, is breaking up in the East as well. The idea of just having fun, pursuing pleasure, having the idea that marriage is for old fogies, and having girlfriends and boyfriends, this is the way to enjoy life. This is a very damaging idea which is being promoted, and is one that appeals heavily to our youth. And if this becomes widespread, then the concept of the family becomes obsolete, as it happened in the West. And this has to be combated somehow. I don't know exactly how this can be done. There is a lot of different things that need to be tried, but we do need to work in many ways to protect the family, which is coming apart under the stress in the same way that it came apart in the West. Similarly, we need to work on building character. This is something which the loss of character has taken place. How do we build character? Well, basically one of the important components is good literature and poetry, in which people are shown models for heroic behavior and virtuous behavior, and these models are praised and accepted and rewarded in the society and admired in the society. This will promote good characteristics. Then the attitude towards money, that money is the criteria of everything in the West, this has to be changed. We should understand that money is to be spent on others. This is one of the fundamental messages of the Quran, which emphasizes spending, spending and spending so many times. It's much more than the encouragement in the Quran to spend on others is much more than the encouragement for ibadah, for worship, for zakat, for salat. All of these things combined take less space than the urging in the Quran to spend money on others. And finally, the luxurious lifestyles which are being promoted, we need to fight that. We need to teach our children, our generations, to live simply with minimum amount of luxury and minimum amount of ostentation. The simple lifestyles are the best for us and are the ones that can be sustained and the ones that can be spread, can be enjoyed by all of the people on the planet. Instead of thinking that I should enjoy luxury while other people are starving, we should develop compassion in the hearts of ourselves and our children, that how can I enjoy things when my brothers and sisters do not have enough to eat. We need to promote this feeling of compassion and brotherhood in order to be able to resist the forces of modernity. So I think I'll end here. Thank you.